I'm sure you've heard the news. Haroun Rasheed was someone special. He made a big difference. Haroun Rasheed was a smart leader who helped people and shared new ideas. He showed everyone that being kind and brave can change the world. Isn't that amazing? Introduction. The achievements of Charlemagne, 742-814, and of Haroun al-Rashid, 763-809, were unprecedented in the history of mankind because never had such weak forces of intellectual self-improvement and virtuous living accomplished so much progress against such a great force of evil represented by the Second Rome that was the Byzantine Empire. It was the first time in all of recorded history that a true ecumenical unity of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism had been realized since the beginnings of Judaism. Although the power of this piece of faith cultural platform was the only means to assure the rebuilding of civilization on the ruins of ancient Anatolia that had earlier been the theater of several hundred years of destruction by the maritime culture of the peoples of the sea, it remained that the unity of intention between secular knowledge and religious faith, or between philosophy and religion, was the only way to bring civilization back to a solid basis for the purpose of peace and development of mankind as a whole. The failure of mankind to resolve the paradoxes embedded in what Nicholas of Cusa had called the peace of faith, de pax fide, remains one of the great unresolved tasks of human civilization. Notably, what caused the destruction of civilization during the great transition period between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age of Greek history, that both Homer and Hesiod expressed in their poetry, and had identified as the worst catastrophe that mankind had suffered under the dictatorship of the Olympian gods. That period of about 175 years, ranging from approximately the demise of the El Argar Spanish culture in 1350 to the destruction of the Hittites of Anatolia in 1175 BC, has been rightly described as the most profound period of a dark age known to mankind, a destruction of the destruction. This was the time when every city in Anatolia, including Troy, 1194 to 1184 BC, had been utterly destroyed several times over. The cultural and economic collapse of the Mycenaean kingdom in Greece and the Hittite kingdom in Anatolia and Syria represented the most violent destruction of cultural literacy in ancient time, leading to the Persian Wars, 492-449 BC, and the Peloponnesian Wars, 431-362 BC, a destruction that became known as the utter destruction of classical humanist thinking, which had been inherited from the ancient astronavigating civilization, extinct now since about 3000 BC, and whose physical remnants may still exist in the lower depths of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea today. As the excavation of the ancient city of Troy by Heinrich Schliemann has shown in 1870, there were several cities built on top of one another, reflecting the occurrence of such a destruction of the destruction. It is this cycle of destruction that must be destroyed once and for all, and the time has come where this is not only possible, but it is absolutely necessary if we are to have any future civilization of mankind. Ironically, the significance of the destruction of the destruction that Lynn referenced in his recent paper does not mean that we have to engage our present enemy, the British Empire, in the same vicious circle, but that we have to break away from this evil cycle of destruction once and for all, and that we have to revive for all future time to come the peace of faith of Charlemagne and Haroun al-Rashid. This is not an option. This is the only way to solve the current physical and epistemological world crisis. The ecumenical diplomacy of Charlemagne and Haroun al-Rashid. During the last decades of the 9th century, there was an extensive diplomatic dialogue among the Carolingian, the Islamic, the Byzantine, and the Judaic faiths. However, very little in the way of documented records have reached us because most of those documents have either been hidden or destroyed by Venetian agents, and whatever few pieces have reached us have been misinterpreted or mistranslated beyond recognition by British intelligence. So, This whole diplomatic period of Charlemagne has to be restored from the vantage point of epistemological hypotheses, rather than on the basis of physical evidence. From that vantage point, there are several sets of diplomatic combinations to be considered with respect to the three major religions of the book in that region of the world at the time. First, let us start with the Catholic-Orthodox relations. In 787, the first diplomatic relation between Charlemagne and Greek Orthodox Empress Irene took place when she sent a mission to Charlemagne, relinquishing her claims to Beneventum and Istria, but maintaining her claim over Croatia and proposing a marriage alliance between the two families. The efforts of Irene were genuine, and the engagement of marriage was made good between the daughter of Charlemagne, Rotrud, and the son of Irene and Leo IV, the Khazar, Constantine VI. This alliance was meant to put the succession of the Byzantine Empire into the hands of the Carolingian dynasty. Charlemagne accepted the offer, and the children were betrothed to each other. This Byzantine opening had been pursued for two primary political and economic reasons. On the one hand, Empress Irene was attempting to find a solution to the slave trade that the Venetians were carrying out extensively from among her former husband's people, the Khazar kingdom, and on the other hand, she was attempting to strengthen her position against local factions at home, as well as pacifying her relationship with Haroun Rasheed on her eastern border. Irene thought that if she were allied with Charlemagne, Haroun would not attack the friend of a friend. However, the alliance proposal was dissolved suddenly with the support of the Venetians when Constantine VI decided to marry one of his mother's chambermaids, Theodote. At the same time, but at a more profound level, there was also the problem of the adoptionist heresy that began to flare up again in France and in Spain at the time. This was an old Venetian trick that was used to produce the earlier Roman Catholic Greek Orthodox split. Adoptionism was a derivative of the Arian heresy, which considered that Christ was not God, but merely the adopted Son of God. Alcuin battled this heresy, and in 786 the bishops of the Byzantine Empire were invited to attend the Seventh Ecumenical Council of Nicaea to discuss the question of the divinity of Christ in the form of the filioque that had been introduced in the Catholic Creed by Charlemagne. The crucial theological, epistemological question of the Trinity was rejected in that form by the Byzantine bishops, and the Council of Constantinople of 787 excluded the idea of an ecumenical approach that aimed at unifying the three great religions of the book. The ecumenical arrangement with the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople having failed, Charlemagne launched a second attempt with Haroun al-Rashid in Baghdad. Again, what must be stressed here is that this East-West ecumenical alliance between Charles and Haroun, what Lynn called the Peace of Religions, were dead set against the Venetian attempts at creating religious wars. Unless this joint opposition to Venetian religious warfare is understood clearly as the underlying motivation behind every action of Charlemagne and Haroun al-Rashid, nothing else makes sense in this entire period of history. Therefore, this ecumenical policy left Pope Leo III out of the picture because he was on the Venetian ultramontane side of the equation. This is why the Pope had been against the Carolingian-Byzantine marriage alliance in the first place. This explains why Charlemagne had resented the Pope crowning him Roman Emperor Charles Augustus in 800. During the reign of Hisham al-Reda of Cordova, 788-796, there grew a wider breach between Spain and Baghdad. After the Abbasids had destroyed the Umayyads in Damascus, a branch of that family reached Cordova and restored the Umayyad rule in Spain, starting in 755. This first split from the rest of the Arab Muslim Empire led the great-grandfather of Harun, Abul Abbas, to create the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad in 750. Though the contention between the two families was more a succession question than a philosophical difference, from that moment on, there were constant tensions between Baghdad and Cordova. In 797, Abdullah, the son of the Umayyad Abdul Rahman ibn Muawiyah, was received by Charlemagne in Aachen. and a pact of non-interference was reached between Aquitaine and Spain. This decided Charlemagne to recall back to Aachen his two sons, Louis, King of Aquitaine, and Pepin, King of Italy, and to decide in council on sending an ambassador to Baghdad like Charlemagne's father, Pepin the Short, had done 30 years before. It is clear that Charlemagne was not only Haroun's protector in the west, but that he was also his best trade partner in the east. This first Carolingian Islamic diplomatic mission had crucial strategic significance for the whole future of mankind, because the question of war and peace depended on the failure or success of the ecumenical approach of Charlemagne's economic policy with Haroun al-Rasheed. In a word, this embassy mission was one of the most important ecumenical experiments in the history of mankind. The Jewish ambassadors had become so prevalent that the name of Jewish merchants became synonymous with negotiators, negociatores. During the entire Carolingian period, the Jewish merchants were protected and exempt from trade taxation. In the early 800s, the Jewish merchants had a trade center in the capital city of Aachen, and Charlemagne had posted an edict by which the market day in the main place of Lyon would be changed from Saturday to a weekday in order to accommodate the Jewish community. A Jewish ambassador by the name of Isaac of Rechen led the first embassy of Charlemagne to Haroun with the purpose of creating sovereign kingdoms or commonwealth nation-states in accordance with the principle of justice and love of mankind, agape, as it was promoted in the Republic of Plato. It was the ability of a moral and religious people to assimilate the universal character of the classical Greek philosophy of Thales, the Pythagoreans, and Plato, which represented the physical proof that they were people of a superior culture. When Ambassador Isaac returned, two ambassadors sent by Haroun al-Rasheed, a Persian ambassador, and the governor of Egypt, Ibrahim ibn Aghlab, accompanied him. Though the instructions to these ambassadors are unknown, however, judging by the ecumenical nature of the diplomatic relationship and by their philosophical implications, as well as by the success of their missions, it is clear that four main foreign policy objectives had been the substance of their relations, and each of those four objectives can be reconstructed on the assumption that they were driven by love of mankind agape and its universal interests of scientific and artistic education. First and foremost, there was the necessity to create an ecumenical civilization by way of a Eurasian land bridge connection with the Jewish Khazar kingdom on the Volga River. This new northeast Scandinavian route had the advantage of going all the way to China, while bypassing the Mediterranean trade route controlled by the Venetians. Secondly, as a derivative of this first objective, the mutual cooperation between Charlemagne, the Khazar kingdom, and Haroun al-Rasheed oriented toward mutual protection of their cultural interests. Charlemagne secured the Abbasid interests with respect to Spain in the west, while the interests of the Carolingian Empire, with respect to the joint Byzantine-Venetian threat, were secured by Haroun al-Rasheed in the east. Thirdly, Charlemagne requested from Haroun al-Rasheed the freedom of access and security of passage for Christian travelers to the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem. A certain number of well-chosen pilgrims acted as Charlemagne's trade agents traveling to the Holy Land by the northeast route, and otherwise, in coordination with the Baghdad Caliphate. Fourthly, a cultural gift exchange of calligraphic manuscripts and translations of Bibles and classical Latin and Greek works, produced by monks in the Charlemagne monasteries and in the Baghdad House of Wisdom, was initiated for the purpose of converting the uneducated pagan populations of the north and of the east to the new ecumenical civilization. This involved some sophisticated forms of ecumenical cooperation among three major religious groups around the Mediterranean at the time: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, as exemplified by the works of Irish monk Alcuin from Aachen, Germany, and later by Judah Halevi from Toledo, Spain. With the return of Isaac of Rechen, first Jewish ambassador of Charlemagne to Baghdad, in 801, a major peace initiative had been established between the two world leaders by way of a transferring of authority to Charlemagne from Haroun al-Rasheed over the control of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. Although the official account of this transfer of power no longer exists, there exist several accounts of it, one of which was written by a Jerusalem monk by the name of Zacharias, who arrived in Aachen during the year 800 with a message from the Patriarch of Jerusalem, with some relics from the site of the resurrection, and messages from Haroun al-Rasheed. The monk was coming back with the news of Haroun al-Rasheed's decision, via the Patriarch of Jerusalem, of confirming that Charlemagne was being given both the religious and civilian control over the Holy Land. This had been considered a total impossibility during the entire 300 year of Islamic history up to that time. When Zacharias came to Aachen, he not only gave Charlemagne the keys of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but he also gave him the keys to the city of Jerusalem itself. These two sets of keys reflected two different distinctions, which were of the utmost importance. This may sound like splitting hairs, but the point is of extreme significance. The keys to the church were an ecclesiastic gesture given by Patriarch George of Jerusalem, in agreement with the Patriarch of Constantinople, while the keys to the city were a political gesture given by the political and religious leader of Islam, Haroun al-Rasheed. It was clear that the ecumenical embassy of Isaac, Lanfred, and Sigismund had been a total success even before their return to Europe. The net effect of this crucial ceremony was not only the recognition that Charlemagne had gained both the ecclesiastic and political authority over Jerusalem, but that he had also gained the recognition for his transcendental function as an ecumenical world leader. This honor was accompanied, as stated by Charlemagne's biographer Einhard, by robes, which corresponded to the high office of the Wali of Jerusalem, which was the highest honor, giving Charlemagne the kingship over Jerusalem, signifying that Haroun al-Rasheed was Charlemagne's vassal and humble steward, awaiting his command with respect to the Holy Land. Thus, this whole ceremonial, as it may not have disappeared from the records of the Islamic or Byzantine annals of the time, expressed recognition that Haroun al-Rasheed had conferred upon Charlemagne the highest rank of ecumenical leadership. As was reported by Charlemagne's biographer, the monk of St. Gall, Notker the Stammerer, Haroun had stated, "He, Charlemagne, will find me a most faithful steward of the revenues of that province." The two ambassadors of Haroun who returned with Isaac, that is, a Persian ambassador, and the governor of Egypt, Ibrahim ibn Aghlab, were therefore authorized to confirm and consecrate Charlemagne in this new function. The Holy Land had therefore become a Frankish protectorate. This meant that there was absolutely no need for crusades. In other words, Charlemagne had been recognized as having been granted powers of sovereignty, potestas, of the Holy Land, over and beyond ordinary religious or political powers of the Islamic law. This was a reflection of the power of principle represented by the new ecumenical civilization, confirming that Charlemagne had actually received the mandate of heaven, and that this was being recognized by both the Islamic Caliphate and the Byzantine Church. It was because of such a great success of Charlemagne and his Carolingian Renaissance that the Venetian bankers lit the fires of the Crusades for several hundred years, and later turned European nations into a theater of religious wars from 1492 until 1648. The Venetians swore never to have another ecumenical alliance of this sort ever again between the East and the West. Venice destroyed the Jewish nation of the Khazar kingdom for that reason, and created the first Jewish ghetto in Venice. Similarly, it was because the Charlemagne ecumenical project had been destroyed by Venice that Nicholas of Cusa initiated the project to create an anti-oligarchical republic in the Americas. As a result of the Venetian control over Europe, European nations became synarchist nations and became governed by parliamentary banking systems in opposition to the American Republic. The explanation for the historical anomaly of the Khazar kingdom cannot be explained simply as a Jewish phenomenon. It can only be understood from the standpoint of the idea of the general welfare for all people, which had also been the economic conception of both Christianity and Islam at the time of Charlemagne and Haroun al-Rasheed. However, instead of applying the principle of general welfare only to individuals within one's own population, Charlemagne and Haroun applied it also to individual nations. In other words, the conquering principle of Christianity and of Islam was a Riemannian solution of using agape to force barbarians to become Christians, Muslims, or Jewish. The purpose of the Abbasid Caliphate was not to gain new ground and wealth at the expense of becoming virtuous, but to civilize barbarians and bring them, as Lin would put it today, to the economics of the complex domain. Both the Carolingian Christians and the Abbasid Muslims considered that the claim over land that was wrested from the barbarians and the infidel belonged to God, and should be treated as a capital asset belonging not to individuals as such, but to all of the people, and should be considered as a common good that could only be regulated and controlled by the state. From that standpoint, the policy of Haroun al-Rasheed was to leave the infidel in actual possession of his land and let him continue to produce from it for his own subsistence and for the benefit of the general community of nations, that is, for the benefit of international trade among Africa, Asia, and Europe. Figure 4. The Abbasid Empire, circa 900 AD. It is interesting to note that in 750 AD, when the Carolingian dynasty of Charlemagne had replaced the dying Merovingian dynasty of the Franks in Europe, the Abbasid dynasty of Haroun al-Rasheed's father, al-Mahdi, was consolidating its own power over the Umayyad Caliphate of Damascus in Southwest Asia and in North Africa. The two events were not only coincidental, but also represented two civilizational developments of the same quality and of the same moral character. So, the Khazars were forcing Islam to restore itself back over the Caucasus in the east, while the Carolingians were forcing Islam back over the Pyrenees in the west. However, no matter how strange the coincidence, little notice was given by historians to the fact that during the last quarter of the 8th century and the first half of the 9th century, the conjunctural forces between Western Europe, Southwest Asia, and North Africa were in the process of creating an extraordinary new form of civilization, a new cultural platform, as Lin put it, which was almost as extended as the Renaissance of Nicholas of Cusa was going to be 600 years later, and which was changing profoundly the axiomatic character of Western civilization. The 9th century Renaissance was moving eastward, while the 15th century Renaissance was moving westward. Let us examine a few historical events that were relevant for preparing this axiomatic change. In 732, when Charles Martel stopped the tide of the Islamic wave on the battlefields of Poitiers, Islam had to retire south of the Pyrenees, never to cross over again as an adversary force against the Christians. As a result of the Poitiers victory and of the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus a few years later, Islam was forced to split into two caliphates, one in the east and one in the west. Similarly, a few years later, the Roman Empire also split into two parts, the collapsing Roman Empire in the west and the Byzantine Empire in the east. The irony of such divisions was that the better parts of those two historical splits, within Islam and within Christianity, united their forces in the creation of the Jewish Khazar kingdom in order to establish the first ecumenical civilization on this planet. The Trinitarian principle of Charlemagne was applied to the three religions as a Riemannian function to establish the peace of faith. This was also most emphatically expressed in the rediscovery of the sphere of the heavens in relationship with the triply connected process of constructing the astrolabe. In 757, the Byzantine emperor, Constantine V, who had married a Khazar princess, invaded the Islamic territory of Malaysia, just long enough to lose it again and be forced to accept a 7-year truce with the Islamic Caliphate of Al-Mansur 754-774, the grandfather of Haroun al-Rasheed. Khazaria had not yet converted to Judaism. During the last year of Al-Mansur's reign, the hostilities started again. Just to situate this period with respect to the Carolingian flank in Western Europe, this happened during the same year, 757, when the father of Charlemagne, Pepin the Short, 751-768, became the King of Gaul, of Germany, and of Lombardy. During the next year, in 758, the 20-year-old Al-Mahdi was sent by his father Mansur to deal with the rebellion in the northeastern region of Persia. After defeating the governor of Tabaristan in 759, Mahdi captured two of his daughters, one of whom, named Kaisaran, he married and she became the mother of two boys, Hadi and Haroun. Haroun was born in 763. Not so coincidentally, her sister was later to become the mother of Haroun's wife. After the death of his father, in 775, Al-Mahdi, 775-785, became caliphate and solved the problem of Venetian intrigues against his nation by creating the first postal service, to which he appointed his agents as postmasters throughout the caliphate. This spying capability provided the Round City with the required intelligence to develop trade extensions and at the same time ward off any possible problems in distant provinces. This was an effective way of bringing to the attention of the command center in Baghdad any possible pirating or sabotaging of the beginnings of the ecumenical Islamic trade activities. Al-Mahdi also built a huge standing army of 100,000 men to protect his frontiers and appointed his son, Haroun, to become the head of it. Haroun was so successful as a military commander that he later forced the Byzantine Empress, Irene, to sue for peace and pay a heavy fee to Islam in order to avoid war. This truce with Irene eventually turned out to become a friendly accommodation with Charlemagne because it gave Haroun full access to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. As a result of this success, Haroun's father named him governor of the western provinces from the border of Syria to Azerbaijan, and second in line to the post of caliphate, after his older brother Musa al-Hadi, 785-786. As military commander of the Caucasian region, Haroun succeeded in making peace with the Khazar kingdom, as well as with Byzantium. With these successes, he received from his father the title of Rasheed, meaning the just. At night, Aaron the Just used to disguise himself and circulate throughout the Round City in order to find out if his people were happy. Investigate the metaphors of the Thief of Baghdad, and you will find a popular fiction of the 1001 Arabian Nights. The story has some truth to it, and Jafar, the Barmakid vizier and personal friend of Haroun, was not the villain and evil sorcerer he was portrayed to be by the modern media. Haroun's only concern was the happiness of the people. In 785, however, tragic events were about to unfold which involved the Queen Mother, Kaisaran, who favored Haroun for the position of caliphate, and who conspired against his older brother Hadi in organizing his murder. During the Persian campaign of that year, a situation erupted where al-Hadi disobeyed an order of his father, al-Mahdi, and refused to return to Baghdad, thus forcing the father to come after him with the caliphate army. Al-Mahdi was never to return alive, and al-Hadi became the rebellious caliphate. Haroun returned with the army to bury his father and to crown his brother the new caliphate. Haroun would not challenge his brother in the interest of peace. The former head of the British political mission to Central Arabia, in Baghdad, 1917-18, British agent and father of the infamous triple agent Kim Philby, H. St. John Philby, wrote for the benefit of his British masters. The army was his, Haroun's, for the commanding, and he disbanded it. His elder brother was at his mercy, and he placed him on the throne. His mother sought to thrust greatness upon him, but he preferred to abide by the verdict of fate. Of few can it be said so truly that he was born great. H. St. John Philby, Haroun Rasheed, D. Appleton Century Company Inc. London, 1934, p.31. Philby was completely perplexed by Haroun's behavior, but he was never able to figure out why. He could not understand why Haroun would break with the usual habit of British warfare that he was trained in and was conditioned to act from. Haroun's decisions were the opposite to what was to be expected from a rival to the throne of Baghdad. This singular phenomenon is worth emphasizing because this is the way that a clear-headed general uses Hannibal's canny maneuver of the sidestepping flank, as Lynn has often emphasized. He does something that he knows his enemy's axiomatic habits cannot accept to have them do. This is all the more important that such a maneuver is not written in any book, but must be used when you are in a historical period of axiomatic change, as Haroun was in at that time. However, the mourning of Al-Mahdi was not yet over, when a second intrigue, also instigated by the Queen Mother, hit the ruling family one more time. This second tragedy came a year later, when Kaisaran arranged to have Hadi killed by his concubines. Under such tragic circumstances, Haroun was forced to become the Prince of Baghdad, although he had taken no part in the killing of his brother. The stains of these court intrigues did not compromise the dignity of Haroun's historical mission, no more than did the later fantasies concocted about him in the Arabian Nights. 1. Baghdad, 767, 1258, A Melting Pot for a Universal Renaissance, by Hussein Askari, Arabic EIR, Stockholm. Author's note. During the days of preparation for this report, and while listening to a live webcast from Washington by Lyndon LaRouche on November 16, 2006, I received a phone call from Baghdad informing me that a cousin of mine was kidnapped and killed in one of the neighborhoods of Baghdad. He happened to have the wrong family name driving in his car through the wrong neighborhood. Coming back to the webcast from my shocking phone call, I heard LaRouche answer a question on the situation in Iraq, saying, "The point is, the United States is not respected as long as Bush is president, and as long as Cheney is influential. If the United States wants to do something in Southwest Asia, it's got to get this bum out of the White House, and it's got to have a spokesman for the United States, which people will believe." To my cousin Sabah, and all those innocent Iraqis who have fallen as victims of this evil war, and to those fighting together with LaRouche to impeach Bush and Cheney inside the USA and to change the course of history, I dedicate this humble report. From its conception in the mind of the Abbasid Khalifa Abu Ja'far al-Mansur in 767 AD, to the day of its first destruction by the Venice-allied Mongol hordes in 1258, Baghdad became the cradle of a historical, scientific, and cultural renaissance and a melting pot of a rich Islamic, Christian, Jewish, Arab, Persian, Greek, Indian collaboration. Al-Mansur, standing in his camp one fresh summer morning on the spot that became Baghdad, said, after consulting with the monks in a nearby Christian cloister, "This is a good location. Here's the Tigris. Nothing stands between us and China. Everything comes to us through it from the sea. Goods reach us here from Al Jazeera, Armenia, and their surroundings. There is the Euphrates. Through it we receive goods from Al-Sham, Syria, and Eastern Mediterranean, and its surroundings." Chronicles of Al-Tabari, Volume 7. According to the chronicler Al-Tabari, Al-Mansur drew the general map of the city and ordered architects and geometers to come from all parts of the Muslim state to plan and build the city. Later on, the cloister and its monks became neighbors of Al-Mansur and his Al-Khuld palace. It was in such dimensions, China and the Mediterranean, that the leaders of the Islamic State at the time were thinking. Haroun al-Rasheed, successor of al-Mansur, established strong diplomatic relations with Charlemagne. Actually, diplomatic relations with China were established already more than a century before that date, when Prophet Muhammad's companion Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas visited the Chinese Tang dynasty emperor in 650 AD. The Chinese emperor Yongwei, according to writer Yusuf Abdul Rahman, respected the teachings of Islam and considered it to be compatible with the teachings of Confucius. To show his admiration of Islam, the emperor approved the establishment of China's first mosque at Chang'an. That mosque still stands there today. Prophet Muhammad's message to Muslims from the outset of his mission was to encourage Muslims to learn reading and writing and to acquire knowledge no matter how far they should travel and how hard they should work. It is recorded in one of his prophet's hadiths that he said, "Pursue knowledge even if it were in China." For that reason, it became imperative on all Muslim leaders and citizens to look for knowledge everywhere, not simply and only in the religious scriptures, as some fanatics today assert. With the building of Baghdad, Al-Mansur escaped the bloody intrigues in the former capital Al-Kufa south of Baghdad and paved the way for a new era of economic, scientific, and cultural development. Comparing the living standards and population density of the 9th century and 20th century Iraq, one is amazed to find out that it was much higher than recently. That development was made possible by the assimilation of scientific knowledge and culture from Persia, India, China, and ancient Greece into one unprecedented melting pot. Most of the translation, rediscovering and assimilation of this knowledge was done by members of different religions and language cultures working together under one mission. Christians and Jews were already integrated into the structures of the Islamic society. The Islamic State by the middle of the 8th century had extended from the Tibet, the Indus and Oxus, Amudari rivers in Asia, all the way past the Mediterranean to North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. The translation feat. The earliest attempts to translate Greek medical records was undertaken by the Umayyad prince Khalid bin Yazid and Omar bin Abdul Azizi in the latter part of the 7th century. However, the translation work was not institutionalized before the building of Baghdad. Arabic chronicles and history books tell the story of the sickness of al-Mansur sometime in the 770s, and how an Assyrian Christian physician was summoned from Persia to successfully treat him. The physician's name was George bin Bakht Yashua. He lived in the city of Gundi Shapur in southwest Iran. That city had become a center for Assyrian Greek-speaking Christians since the reign of the pre-Islamic Persian Shah Khosrow Anushirwan, 531-579 AD, who used to assemble his Roman prisoners of war in that city. A school of medicine had developed there. But when al-Mansur asked George to move with his family to Baghdad and built a hospital and educational center there, Baghdad became the new center for medical science. Many books on medicine were translated from Assyrian and later Greek language. The books of the Greek Galen and Hippocrates became a central object of translation and study. The Abbasid Caliphs became the patrons of science and philosophy. The most important of them were Haroun Rasheed, reigned 786-809, and his son al-Ma'mun, 813-833. Under al-Rasheed, the Humanist Academy, the House of Wisdom, was established with his direct patronage and sponsorship. In the beginning, that academy was focusing on gathering all available manuscripts and books from all different languages and translating them into Arabic, the official language of the Islamic State. Greek had the lion's share of attention of appreciation. Nonetheless, as the work started to develop and the economic and cultural needs of the expanding and growing nation increased, the translators had to move beyond the work of translation. They had to teach the subject matters of the books being translated. They had to replicate all the previous discoveries and comment on them, and teach the Khalifa, his children, and all the students of these different sciences. Al-Ma'mun ordered the building of an astronomical observatory as an annex to the House of Wisdom. There the translators themselves were scientists and teachers. One of the very early such translator-mathematician-physician was Al-Batrick, who translated and taught the books of Euclid. He also made the first Arabic translation of Plato's Timaeus dialogue, which became one of the most important works of philosophy throughout the 400 years of the Islamic Renaissance and the most read and commented on. The Astronomical Observatory in the House of Wisdom became itself another institution where some of the most brilliant Muslim astronomers were educated and worked, such as Qusta bin Luqa and the Banu Musa brothers, Ali bin Isa al-Ustorlabi, the astrolabium maker, Muhammad bin Musa al-Khawarizmi, founder of algebra, who dedicated his first book on the matter to al-Ma'mun, and al-Battani. In order to find manuscripts of works of Plato and other Greek philosophers, which were available in the neighboring and often hostile Byzantine Empire, Haroun al-Rasheed and al-Ma'mun used both diplomacy and sometimes military victories to acquire manuscripts. In one of his battles with the Byzantines, al-Rasheed suggested exchanging Roman prisoners and officers for Greek books. However, the most effective way was to send intelligence agents to hunt for books and recruit Greek-speaking translators inside the Byzantine Empire. See Torbjorn Yerlerup, Fidelio, Summer 2003. The renowned Muslim historian Ibn al-Nadim writes in his chronicles book Al-Firast, when al-Ma'mun defeated the Roman king, he wrote to him demanding that he discloses all the books he had been keeping in secret places in Rome, Constantinople. The Roman king, who first refused, agreed later to do that. Al-Mamun sent some of his scholars, including Al-Hajjaj bin Matar, Ibn al-Batrik, and Salam, the head of the House of Wisdom, and others. When the books were brought to him, he ordered the books to be translated immediately. It is said that Yohanna bin Masaweh was among them too. Another historian, Ibn Nabate, writes in his book Sar-ul-Uyun about one Sal ibn Harun. He was appointed by Al-Ma'un as the guardian of the chest of books at the House of Wisdom. This chest contained the books of the ancient philosophers that were brought back to Al-Ma'mun from Cyprus. The story was that when Al-Ma'mun reached a truce with the ruler of that island, he sent messengers to him asking for the chest of the books of the Greeks that were kept in a special chamber where nobody could have access to them. When Al-Ma'mun received the books, he became very happy and excited, and he appointed Sal bin Harun as a guardian for these books. It is obvious from those stories that the books on Greek philosophy and science were intentionally kept away from the public in the Eastern Roman Empire for clear political and ideological reasons. Another prominent translator was Yohanna bin Masaweh, died 857, who also came from Gundi Shapur. He established a hospital in Baghdad. Yohanna was a Nestorian Christian. Haroun al-Rasheed assigned him to translate Greek books that were taken as booty from Byzantine cities conquered by the Muslim army. He was also made the chief translator, verifying other translations and training translators. Al-Ma'mun later made him the director of the House of Wisdom. In addition to translation, Yohanna wrote books on geometry, medicine, and optics. He also made medical experiments on animals, such as monkeys, to test new medicines. One of his most known students was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who mastered Assyrian, Arabic, Greek, and Persian. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, 808-873, is most famous as a translator. He translated 100 Greek books to Assyrian and 37 to Arabic. He was trained in medicine and made original contributions to that subject. However, as the leading translator in the House of Wisdom, he came to have an enormous influence on the mathematicians of the time. Hunayn, who was a Nestorian Christian, learned Greek in Alexandria as a young student and became an expert on the Greek language. He took part in the travels in the Byzantine Empire and parts of the Muslim world to find books and recruit translators and scholars. Hunayn personally translated books of both Plato and Aristotle. Other prominent translators in the House of Wisdom were the astronomer Thabit bin Qurra, Yusuf al-Khuri al-Qas, who translated Archimedes' now lost work on triangles, and Kusta ibn Luca, a Syrian Christian who translated Hypsicles, Theodosius's Spherica, Heron's Mechanics, Autolycus Theophrastus's Meteora, Euclid, and other works. The son of Hunayn, Ishaq ibn Hunayn, strongly influenced by his father, is famed for his revised Arabic translation of Euclid's Elements. A problematic aspect of this process of translation was that from the outset, no real distinction was made regarding the different methods of scientific reasoning within the Greek culture. That was probably due to two factors. One is the corruption of scientific thinking during the Roman Empire's centuries-long Dark Age. The other is the eagerness to collect and digest as much as possible of whatever was available from the ancients, in accordance with the recommendation of the Prophet Muhammad and the Holy Quran. In the beginning, almost all Greek books on science and philosophy were given equal weight. For example, both Aristotle and Plato were held up as great thinkers, with the distinction that Plato is the divine philosopher due to his monotheistic view of the universe and its creator, a view compatible with the beliefs of Islam. Aristotle, on the other hand, was regarded as the first scholar due to his down-to-earth empirical approach to knowledge. Another example was the treatment of astronomy and geometry from both the fraudulent Ptolemaic method and the saner Pythagorean method of spherics. The verification and the sorting process took some time. When Muslim scientists started to replicate and examine both the axiomatic and experimental aspects of what was delivered to them. Through the interventions of such great Muslim scientists and Aristotelian philosophers as Al-Kindi, Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, in the 9th and 10th centuries and even later, the dividing line started to become clearer. Critique and outright refutations of Ptolemy's astronomy, Euclid's geometry, and Aristotle's methodology started to become a key aspect of the dissertations of upcoming scholars. Sorting out this crucial aspect of the history of the epistemological fight within the Islamic Renaissance has not been undertaken yet in any serious manner. Its time has come now, and with the type of historical work being carried out by the LaRouche youth movement, it seems appropriate now to accomplish this unfinished mission. The Banu Musa brothers, a youth movement. The three Banu Musa, three sons of Musa brothers, became orphans following the death of their father, Musa bin Shakir, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer in the court of Al-Mamun in the early 9th century. The three boys, Muhammad, Ahmad, and Hassan, were taken by Al-Mamun under his custody. He ordered the governor of Baghdad, Ishaq bin Ibrahim, who in his turn delivered them to Yahya ibn Mansur, a prominent scholar, astronomer, and dean of the House of Wisdom. The three brothers grew up inside that great academy. They lived and worked with such great philosophers as Al-Jahid, Al-Kindi, and Al-Khwarizmi, and translators and scholars like Hunayn bin Ishaq, Ishaq bin Hunayn, Kosta bin Luka, and Thabit bin Qurra. The three brothers learned Greek and studied many of the books that were translated. However, as they became young adults, they participated in all kinds of political, economic, and scientific missions that were assigned to them by Al-Mamun. One of the close collaborators of Banu Musa was astronomer and mathematician Sanad bin Ali. Sanad was from a Jewish family from Iraq. He worked with the brothers in a large number of crucial scientific and economic projects, such as building water canals around Baghdad, connecting the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. One such fascinating mission was the measuring of the circumference of Earth. In the 820s, Al-Mamun got hold of Greek documents referencing Eratosthenes' magnificent and creative method of measuring the circumference of Earth. Al-Mamun wanted that verified or rediscovered to find out the truth. He assigned to Banu Musa and Sanad the mission of replicating and rediscovering the principle that guided Eratosthenes. A number of the prominent astronomers and mathematicians joined the brothers out to the desert south of Mosul. Sanad wrote down the report on the mission. The brothers came with a new method of measurement. Rather than measuring the difference of the angle of the shadow cast by the sun rays on two poles located in two different locations along the meridian, Banu Musa used the heavenly sphere as a reference point. They measured the angle of declination from the first location in relation to the North Pole in the heavenly sphere, and moving north until the angle in relation to the North Pole changed by 1 degree, all the time measuring the distance between the first location and the second. Knowing that each degree on the heavenly sphere corresponds to 1 degree on the meridian circle of the surface of Earth, they came to the conclusion that the distance between the two locations A and B, multiplied by 360 degrees, would give them the measure of the circumference of Earth. The result they reached was 40,253 kilometers in today's units, missing by about 133 kilometers. They did the measurement once again going south from the first location and reached a very close conclusion. With that accomplished, Al-Mamun was satisfied, and Muslim astronomy gained a new discovery of principle. The discovery was the principle of proportionality between the heavenly sphere and the sphere of the earth, reflecting the proportionality between the Platonic reason in the heaven and reasoning that is within us. Timaeus 47. C. Most of the persons working in the House of Wisdom were youth. Not only the Banu Musa brothers, but also Ishaq ibn Hunayn and Kosta bin Luka, Al-Khwarizmi and Thabit bin Qurra were all in their teens and 20s when they studied and worked in there. Like the LaRouche youth movement today, they were involved in political and economic affairs of the state as economic and scientific advisors to the caliphate. They also traveled to recruit other youth from different parts of the Islamic State, and even Byzantium. One important example was the recruitment of Thabit bin Qurra by Muhammad bin Musa. Muhammad was on his way back from one of his exploration journeys in Greece and met Thabit in the town of Haroun, southern Turkey today. He organized Thabit, who was a Mandean and not a Muslim, to accompany him back to Baghdad to work together. Thabit was much younger, but showed signs of genius. The three brothers adopted him as fourth brother and made sure that he got the best education. Thabit grew up to become one of the most important translators and astronomers in Islamic history. He translated dozens of Greek books of Plato, Archimedes, Hippocrates, Euclid, etc. He authored 150 different books in Arabic in mechanics, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and medicine. The books on mechanics by Archimedes and Haroun of Alexandria that he translated opened the eyes of Banu Musa on this important science, which played a great role in their participation in the economic development of Iraq in particular, and the Islamic State in general. Waterworks, canals, fountains, tools, and urban water systems were designed by Banu Musa. They even designed and built mechanical toys for children and amusing tricks for the entertainment of the public. Banu Musa always worked as a team. One of the joint projects they undertook together was on mechanics. That book is still available in the University of Aleppo, Syria. It also includes geometrical studies and commentaries on Archimedes' two works on the sphere and the cylinder, and on the equilibrium of planes. The book is completed with illustration of the tools and constructions they designed, in a way that reminds us of Leonardo da Vinci's work. Banu Musa selflessly served the spreading of knowledge and always gave credit to the Greek scientists whose works they reworked and improved. The irony of the Banu Musa brothers is that they acquired the measure of the circumference of the earth from a relationship to a heavenly sphere that could not be measured mathematically, simply because that sphere does not exist. So, the result of the Earth's measurement was discovered through a defect of perception, an inferential shadow that the mind used to discover the reflection of an ordering principle of the universe, a principle that is higher than mathematics, and that mathematics cannot account for, nor compute. Transmission to Europe. Some of the works translated by the House of Wisdom were later translated into Latin by scholars in Toledo, Spain, which from the 10th century onward was a center of Muslim-Jewish-Christian collaboration in philosophy and science. From Toledo, these translations, as well as original writings by Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi, including the rich treasure of Arab medicine, were disseminated throughout Europe. Commentaries on Plato by Al-Farabi were among the first known works on Plato to be known in Europe. Only the Timaeus dialogue was known in Europe at the time, and that to a very limited extent. Many ancient Greek works were translated into Latin from Arabic. The example of the famous Apollonius of Perga is typical. His Conics, which played a crucial role in the development of modern astronomy, was translated from both Greek and Arabic. Its first 4 books were translated from Greek, and books 5, 6, and 7 from Arabic. Johannes Kepler would later revolutionize astronomy when he hypothesized that the planets moved along the pathways of elliptical curves described by Apollonius in the Conics. The influence of Islamic science on developments on the West is a greater subject than could be dealt with in this short report. Therefore, it will remain as a separate subject for future attempts. Religious tolerance in Abbasid Baghdad. It become clear from the above-mentioned prominent and crucial involvement by Assyrian and Nestorian Christians in both medical care and studies, and the work in the House of Wisdom, that they were regarded as an integral part of the Islamic society. The Christians had special privileges in Baghdad, allowing them to have many churches in Baghdad, and a residential quarter in Baghdad which was called Haroun. The patriarchs of the Eastern churches chose to have their holy seat in Baghdad. Unlike the Roman Empire, Christian archbishops were elected by the church and approved later by the Khalifa. In addition to their professional positions, Christians were appointed in political positions too. Some of them, such as Abdun bin Said and Nasser bin Harun, were appointed as ministers in the time of Khalifa al-Muttaqi in the 10th century and under the Buwayhid dynasty in the 10th century. Less known is the situation of the Jews in that period. In Baghdad, Jews had a major thriving quarter, which remained so until the fall of Baghdad under the Mongol invasion in 1258. This quarter was visited in 1169 by Benjamin of Toledo, a Jewish traveler and historian who traveled from Spain through the Islamic world to Baghdad. He left a book called The Journey of Benjamin of Toledo, available in Arabic still today. In that book, Benjamin of Toledo states that there were about 40,000 Jews living in Baghdad at the time. He also reports that there were 10 Torah schools and 28 synagogues. Benjamin described in his book the great hospitality and respect the Grand Rabbi enjoyed there from the Muslims, who considered him the heir of King David and chief of the Mosaic nation. The Grand Rabbi had both religious and legislative authority among the Jewish community in Baghdad. His authority was protected by the Khalifa. Arab chronicles describe the Grand Rabbi when he was summoned to meet the Khalifa as dressed in silk with a white turban ornamented with diamonds. He was accompanied armed guards with a page running ahead of his entourage shouting, "Make way to our master, son of King David." The Khalifas, since Haroun Rasheed enjoyed having open debates in their court, where they had a weekly gathering of representatives of all religions and schools of thought. Christian and Jewish leaders had the full freedom to defend their faith in front of the Khalifa against any challenger. A famous such debate was witnessed in the court of Al-Mamun between the Muslim Imam al-Rida and the Christian patriarch and Grand Rabbi. The debate was about Imam al-Rida's argument to prove that in both the Bible and the Torah there is evidence of the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, quoting extensively from the two holy books. The Mandeans were also integrated and tolerated in the Islamic State and received the same good treatment as Christians and Jews. Some of the most brilliant astronomers and scientists in the Abbasid era were Mandaean, such as Thabit bin Qurra al-Battani and the famous chemist Jabir bin Hayyan.